everybody. Can you hear me? Okay. Hi, everybody. I'll be talking about our paper, The Role of Online Forums in Developer Understanding of Privacy Law. It's a case study we did on Reddit. So first things first, developers often need to comply with GDPR requirements, and as we know, these can be difficult to translate into actual software and other practice. As a result, we've been seeing that they are using these online forums like Reddit for privacy compliance tasks. And because of this, Reddit has become some sort of informal knowledge base for GDPR. However, of these people that use these forums, little is known about their backgrounds, like professional background, education, how that is actually shaping their engagement on the platform, what is actually motivating their use, what's the underlying reason, and also why they're trusting the advice they're given from strangers on the internet. And then also, big picture, like what are the most common challenges that they're facing that they need help with. So overall, it's unclear how these forms are shaping and shaping these compliance environments. So from this, we formed four major RQs. The first centers around their motivations for engagement. The second is about just their common challenges. The third is how they're assessing the credibility and resolving ambiguous information. And then the fourth is centered around how we did the study. We compared the results from a survey with those we identified in Reddit posts. So there's a lot of related work surrounding GDPR, Reddit, and things of that sort. But generally, they either consist of just solely surveys or a post analysis. And some of them do map to specific GDPR articles, but only partial mappings. But what our study aims to do is investigate the motivations and the their ambiguity. Last name before. So here's the overview of our study. It's in two parts. First is this survey. We first posted a survey on two subreddits, r/GDPR and r/YourPrivacy. We also messaged some highly active users in these communities. We received around 500 responses, and after some validation, we ended up with 223 valid responses. So for the Reddit post, what we did was we first extracted around 2,000 posts using the Reddit API, and then we did a lot of manual annotation to construct a ground truth first on whether each post was related to both privacy and development in some way. And then of the ones that were, we looked at what are the actual challenges they're expressing in the post. And to extend the data set, we utilized an LLM, and we tested several models, several prompting methods, and ended up using GPT-5. We did a human-in-the-loop approach to validate all the outputs from that model. And then from that, we had the data set fully labeled with the privacy and development, and we did a separate prompt for the actual challenges themselves. So here's the example of the one for the challenges. I won't go over the whole thing, but just the gist of it is that we used a chain of thought prompt. We provided examples of every single challenge that we had identified through the annotations, and then we instructed it to just output the most prominent challenge in the post. So the results. First off, who's actually using these forums? It's mostly technical professionals at for-profit companies, and unsurprisingly, most of them work at jobs that need to comply with GDPR in some way. A lot of them hold a lot of different certificates. That's what the figure is, with CIPP being the most common. And most of the respondents in our survey were actually from North America. And also, most of them, 75%, are engaging with these platforms at least a few times a week, if not daily. So these are some of the questions we asked about the motivations. So we asked different questions depending on whether they created posts or only read posts. And so for users that only create posts, their motivations were generally starting discussion, sharing knowledge, seeking advice, expressing their opinions. For people that only read the posts, it's things you might expect, just staying up to date, getting more information. And we had a few of them that said they just weren't confident in sharing knowledge or posting or reporting. So through a lot of statistical tests that we did in the paper, we state that their privacy-related experience, their certifications that they hold, their organizational context, so where they're working, can shape how they're participating in these discussions in some way. So the main challenges that we identified in the survey were four major groups: DPIAs, data breach notifications, DSARs, and ROPA. And these also varied by company type, company size, and whether the participant held a privacy certificate. And we also found that most of the companies that these participants worked at are seeking some sort of external legal help to fill some knowledge gaps that they don't have. In the post, we identified a broader set of challenges, and of those, consent was the most common, with cookie consent being at the top. But we also saw things surrounding data processing agreements, data transfers between countries, just simple definitions of GDPR terms, like what is a data processor, and then also some more generic compliance tasks that didn't so cleanly map to other categories. Here are a few examples of the ones that we found in the post. So for DPI, we had a B2B cloud software provider. They're asking, they had a privacy policy, they had a terms of service document, and if that contained the same information, they need a DPI. And we looked at all the replies for these posts too, and the replies generally said that a DPA wasn't necessary in this use case. And then they also had some people pointing out that the confusion might have been surrounding or been caused by the informal use of DPA as a term and then the GDPR's formal definition. For cookie consent, there was a lot that were just about like what can you track, the differences between different types of cookies, the confusion about GDPR and other sources like the EPD. But the replies in these posts were also expressing some confusion, so they also weren't often certain about strictly necessary or functional cookies. For cross-border data transfers, we had one post saying they had remote workers in another country and they needed to access sensitive data. So the replies were pretty unanimous. They should conduct a risk assessment. So we also looked at the regulatory sources that were referenced in comments, and ICO and EDPB were cited the most. IAPP and NIST were more rare in the post, but NIST was reportedly more common in our survey. We also looked at the top GDPR articles that people were citing, so Article 28, 6, 13, 3. But 11% of all the comments, so a good number of them, were referencing a specific GDPR article and so on. So for how these users are assessing credibility of like the advice they receive, some things you might expect. So just checking with external sources, checking profile histories, looking at votes, and then just asking follow-up questions. But in a small number of them reported that they never verify or look for these sources. And then these methods could be explained by some of their professional background, but we didn't find that their privacy experience affected it. So overall, we will say that there is a high motivation for users to provide advice and to share perspectives that they have and experiences they have on these informal platforms. And people that are more involved in privacy, that have certifications, they contribute more frequently. So the strategies for assessing the credibility are very casual, and rely on like Reddit features, like upvotes and things like that. Interestingly, GDPR compliance is very prevalent in North American companies, as found in our survey. And then the scope of challenges is very broad as well, with consent being very common on these GDPR-specific forms. But there's still the risk of inaccurate information in the replies. So some of the implications that we identified for educators, for industry, we think that a lot of the common challenges that people are facing could be solved with just better education. So things, training in consent, PII, and so on. But then also that there is a need for better tooling to assist these developers. So like SDKs with more privacy-specific UI components, and then also things like privacy notice generation from source code. Some of the future work that we pointed out was that we could use human AI collaboration to implement these privacy practices, and then also look a little more deeply into how these users are actually resolving some of the ambiguities in the posts themselves. So, thank you. I'll be happy to discuss more this year.